There is something that everyone needs to understand. Democrats always introduce gun control bills after mass shootings because they're not serious about fixing the problem. Don't get me wrong, Democrats would crack down on gun ownership if they had the chance. After all, their dream is a defenseless society. But they're not serious about fixing this problem or any problems really. Their concern is with winning political points. If you don't believe me, then why do Democrats always introduce so many bills that would not have stopped whatever tragedy they're pretending to be so upset about at the time? You see, if Democrats introduce what they pretend are solutions and Republicans refuse to go along, then they get to point their collective finger at Republicans and blame them for the deaths of innocent children. Thus, political points are made. Joe Biden tries to pretend that he's not against the Second Amendment. He only wants common sense gun control. He's not going to go after responsible gun owners, he tells us. He and the Democrats just want to ban bump stocks and military-style weapons and improve background checks. Who could possibly be against all that? And oh yeah, I almost forgot. They want to allow gun makers to be sued when a person uses their gun to commit a crime. And that says it all. Democrats want to destroy the gun industry like they're trying to destroy the oil industry. Is it no wonder that gas prices are through the roof right now? But that's a subject for a different day. As far as this issue is concerned, Democrats are only interested in two things: complete gun control and having power. And history would provide great examples where complete gun control gives the ruling class a lot more power. Not a coincidence, I don't think. Just to make sure that we're all on the same page about what's going on, in 2005, Democrats and Republicans both supported legislation that essentially stated that gun manufacturers can't be held liable for someone using their product to hurt someone else. In the 90s and early 2000s, gun makers had to defend themselves against a bunch of frivolous lawsuits, and they turned to Congress to do something about it. The way Democrats today frame it, though, is that gun makers have a special immunity that no one else has. But that's not true. When Darrell Brooks drove his car through a Christmas parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin, killing 6 people and injuring 70 others, nobody thought it was the car's fault. How could we possibly blame his actions on the company that manufactured the car he was driving? Well, that's what Democrats want for gun makers. Because if Smith & Wesson was held responsible for someone using their product to commit a crime, they would go out of business, which is precisely what Democrats want to happen. Imagine if that was the standard for every company. They'd all go out of business. Could you imagine DeWalt being sued because some crazy guy killed his family with a hammer they sell? Or Easton getting sued because a Little League dad hit another dad in the head with his kid's baseball bat? After all, more people are murdered with blunt objects like hammers and baseball bats than are murdered with AR-15s. Or how about your local water company being held responsible for a mother who drowned her kids in the bathtub? That sounds absurd, doesn't it? And that would be the same as blaming a gun manufacturer for what some psycho does with the product they make. Listen, Democrats are only focused on one thing: gaining power. And that's achieved by blaming all the ills of society on Republicans. If a mass shooting happens and the shooter is white and most of the victims aren't white, it's because of racism. And that's the Republicans' fault. If the shooter is Hispanic and most of the victims are Hispanic, it's the gun's fault. And it's also the Republicans' fault. And if a guy dies in an encounter with the police, it's because of systemic racism. And you guessed it, that's the Republicans' fault. There seems to be a theme here. It's always the Republicans' fault. Unless it's the dozens of young people getting shot every weekend in places like Chicago, then Democrats don't even want to talk about it. Why not? Because there is no political value in it for Democrats. Look, Democrats aren't serious about finding solutions. They're only serious about finding ways to gain power. Whether it's politicians or their surrogates in the media, it's nothing but constant spin for political positioning. The Waukesha killer was reported as a car that drove through a parade by CNN. But a white teenager who smiled at a Native American as he played a drum and chanted in the kid's face was called a white supremacist. You know, because he was white and wearing a MAGA hat. And there was political value in it. It's absolutely disgusting how Democrats use every crisis as an opportunity to gain power. They're gearing up this week to shock the world with live, prime-time, wall-to-wall coverage of the January 6th committee hearings where they'll blame Republicans for everything just to score political points. They'll say that the Republican Party supports white supremacy without a single shred of evidence. I mean, these people don't mind standing on the graves of babies if it gets them a few more votes. Now, what we should be doing is talking about real solutions. If we want to stop these kinds of tragedies from happening, I think we have to do two things. We have to try to stop these kinds of people from being created, and we have to be allowed to protect ourselves. And while it might sound nice when a politician tells you he's going to do something about it, the reality is that we have to make changes that politicians aren't even involved in. We have to protect our own communities. We have to change the culture in our society. Absentee fathers should be shamed, and single mothers shouldn't be afraid to admit that they need a strong male role model for their kids. It's on the community where each of us live. It's on us to make the changes needed to make our communities safe. And as long as we look to politicians to fix the problems we have, the problems will only get worse, while those in power blame anyone but themselves. Because for them, it's not about finding solutions. It's about exploiting problems. And that's the simple truth. Hey guys, thanks for watching. And if you all want to support this channel, check out the links in the description, and let's keep putting some common sense back into the great debate.